Hello, welcome to our second web series from Bayaan Collective, the Bayaan Conversations. Today we are going to discuss shame and erotic visual representations, and we have with us Shuchi Karim, who is a scholar, a researcher, and she has done her PhD on gender and sexuality, and she is currently with BRAG. Welcome, Shuchi. Thank you. All right, so I wanted to actually have this as a very informal conversation, and the topic of the discussion, as I said, erotica and shame. And the way I want to think about it, and this is kind of, we thinking about it and thinking this through, is that there are many different forms of erotic visual representation, from art to cinema to photography. But if we look at different kinds of representations, we see shame attached to some and not. For example, if we look at the sculpture David, for example, it's a male nude figure, and you can see David's penis, and it's not considered shameful. If you look at a lot of the paintings of European masters, there are a lot of nude female bodies, but that's considered high art. But in other forms of erotic visual representations, it's considered shameful. And we are interested in talking about why, in one form it's considered shameful, and in other contexts, in other form, it's not. And it's considered vulgar. Why? I mean, obviously there's a temporal aspect to it, because these are old, I don't know, we want to talk about it. I mean, is it only the temporal aspect, or there are other kind of, aspects like gender, for example, that informs these? So,
thank you. You just started talking about David, and I remember going to Florence and actually staring at David quite shamelessly because it is so beautiful. And for a second it felt that you can appreciate a male body in a public sphere, and with 10,000 other people staring and glaring mainly at David's penis. But there's a liberating factor only because it is within the premise of art. I mean, if someone as good looking as David was standing outside
Yes.
any piazza in Florence, we would not be that appreciative. We would be amused, but actually it would be seen as vulgar or obscene. So there is a clear demarcation of space. I think shame and erotica both are very special concepts. Because both are very rooted in social construction of sexuality, which is special in language, in private and in public, and how they are represented in different kind of mediums. Visual medium is also based on linguistic medium, right? So how each culture's language constructs, shapes, gives connotations to words and verbalization of erotica is either in in the framework of shame, or of such high art that it goes beyond it, or to the low status of vulgarity. So it's a mixed kind of space. For example, if you see representation of body, both male and female body in television, right? Male naked torso is fine. It is not seen totally. It used to be seen as not as erotic or sexualized as a female body. Obviously, in most of the televisions, even in America, it will not be a frontal nudity. Nipples are considered tabooed. I mean, it's very strange. You can have full pornography, but you cannot show nipples. You cannot do breastfeeding because it is supposed to be too sexualized of the female body, but it is actually a reproductive role that a woman plays. The same woman can be an object of sexual desire in a different way. So it's a concept of when we sexualize a body or not. So that is important. I was just thinking that this whole framework of shame and erotica or vulgarity itself is very dominated by the Western hegemonic ideologies and constructions, and because of all these historical processes of colonization and that modernity processes, rest of the world has got a direct, indirect of course, but very direct influence of Western ideas, what is seen as shame. For example, you're talking about this naked sculptures of men and women, as, in very affluent families, European ones especially. You have at the garden, somebody's pouring water, there's a naked woman just staring, vaguely at the sun, sky, like, as if she doesn't know that she's naked, but she's pouring water. And she will keep on pouring water for a while. When this kind of, aristocrat modernity came to places like, say, India, in the last 2 centuries, especially in places like Bengal, the aristocrat Bengal houses, they were very conservative in their own articulation of gender and sexuality. Women were not allowed outside, they were educated inside. Women at the same time were not wearing blouses, but that was not seen as shameful, right? They were seen as a normal dressing up. But they all had installed these figurines in different parts of their houses, and which people would marvel at, wouldn't understand. And if you go through literature, you'll see that these are these moments of dilemma for this newly modernized, or in the process of half-baked modernized colonial time. The same, you also see, how radical fundamentalist groups of different religious beliefs nowadays react to art. You can go and destroy certain artifacts because you think it is not unacceptable, to the extent that it is vulgar. So this whole construction gets pretty jumbled up, especially in a globalized era more now. So we don't know how my own culture defines vulgarity versus what I'm seeing as art. So there is a bit of tug of war in a young mind, and therefore, the articulations are not yet, I think, formed. So it's a kind of a gray area.
Yeah, no, I agree. But as I'm thinking about vulgarity, it strikes me. I mean, is it a worthwhile project at this point, or at any point, to actually, define, what is vulgar? I mean, what purpose does it serve ultimately? Because what is vulgar to me may not be vulgar to you. I mean, and that's a very, generalized statement. But vulgarity has always been a social construct. So how is it important, or why is it important to label something vulgar versus not? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think vulgarity is just a symbolic of the whole discourse on shame and erotica. Vulgar as a word, or vulgarity as a concept itself, kind of opens the gate of, or even the Pandora's box of how we compartmentalize and define each item that we confront on a daily basis. Depending on how a particular society's or culture's journey is going through at a given time, they start defining vulgarity. Take sleeveless bras, right? In the 60s and 70s, in the modern, urban women, sleeveless was seen as a normal, a very normalized, not normal, but normalized way of dressing up. It was not seen as a rebellious way of female trying to assert their bodies or things like that. There was a cultural sanction to that. And then somehow through the 80s and 90s it's changed. And you wouldn't see actually in the 80s and 90s too many women wearing, sleeveless. It was seen something vulgar because, so all of a sudden armpits, seeing armpit was seen as erotic and vulgar.
So just to clarify, are you saying that in context of Bangladesh?
In the context of Bangladesh, or Bangladesh. And now you'll see, again in 2000, later on, you have a younger generation, they see clothing in a different way, and they are in kind of opposition of hijab or very conservative dressing versus, the losing the sleeves, that kind of. They go beyond how they see vulgarity or normativity of vulgarity, but they try to negotiate it. Vulgarity is always negotiated. Take in high culture, right? You can sort of package it in such a way that it becomes palatable. The same package when you see in mass produced films of any culture, take any culture, you will not see it as, that. I mean, we only talk about South Asia or American things. For example, you go to Africa, and I remember one of the anthropologist, teacher of mine, she was saying that somehow we don't understand how erotica is constructed or vulgar it is seen. So it was in Lagos, and there was a lot of shelter homes, and the good-hearted, Britons were thinking that we must send school dresses to kids so they can go and, go to school in nice pants and shirts. So they send actually thousands of those, old clothes. And the children were pretty shocked because it was shameful for girls of that context to wear trousers. It was okay to go topless because the body was not seen as shameful. The female body, breasts were not seen as shameful, but a female leg to be covered in a man's clothing was seen completely unacceptable. So you had like girls topless and the boys wearing pants and the girls with the skirts. So, and it would be totally a shock for the good-hearted, English people. Oh my God, that was not my idea of clothing you. So it totally changes context and it creates new discourses for both parties.
It's interesting because I want to draw on two things because when we first started the discussion, you pointed out that a lot of our ideas about shame and vulgarity and erotica are kind of informed by the Western norms. Although West again is a construct. Everything is a construct. And as you said, like, if you actually talk to any of the kind of so-called, I don't want to conservative, religious conservatives, they will also have those similar ideas about vulgarity, which is fine. But my point was that there are these dominant ideas about vulgarity and shamefulness and erotica and the body that we have kind of internalized, and I want to link that with the the gendered aspect to it, especially as it relates to the female body. And a lot of, if I may draw from pornography, most of pornography is very much still catered towards males, the male gaze. Even if you look at lesbian porn, for example, it is again catering towards the male gaze, the male fantasies. And I'm not somebody who's going to say that porn bad, non-porn good. There's so much complexity to it, but part of it into account that there is a lot of female objectification going on, but at the same time another part of it is that we attach something shameful mostly to the female body, right? So for example, there was a recent scandal in the US about a lot of nude photos of celebrities being leaked, and a lot of the mainstream talking points was that how shameful, or they probably shouldn't have taken these photos, because now in the age of social media or not, if you take a nude photo, it will be leaked, one way or the other. But the other way of thinking about it, what is shameful about the female body, right? If your photo leaks, the problem is that somebody breached your privacy, right? So that should be what people should be concerned about, and not that somebody's nude photo leaked, because there is nothing shameful about a nude female body. What we should be shaming is that somebody breached somebody's privacy.
The crime itself.
The crime itself, exactly. That. And if I leaked my own photos, I'm fine. I want my photo to be out there because I appreciate my body, so there is nothing shameful about that. And because I want to link that to pornography, because a lot of times when we talk about pornography, what gets lost is that beyond this objectification of the female body, beyond which is again rooted in patriarchy, which is very real and which is exploitative and violent, and I'm not going to say that it's not, but we also kind of there is this subtext of shame that we assign, as if there is something shameful about bodies, mostly female bodies, but maybe sometimes male bodies too. And do you agree? Do you what are your thoughts? What do you think?
Absolutely, I agree with it. This I think goes as far as back as the biblical stories of Adam and Eve. The whole point of eating the apple and the realization in Islam, in Judaism, or the narratives, biblical narratives, the moment the sin is committed, the first problem is seen as awareness of the naked body. So it's like, my God, I was naked. They were naked.
Yes. Before
that.
Yes.
And then, but the thing is that there's something with knowledge. What is knowledge then? That there is a difference between the body, and the body has certain parts that has to be covered and to be ashamed of. the whole concept of shame with that bloody apple and a bite transferred into fig leaves and a total disaster for gender-based discrimination start with, I love religion, I'm not practicing anything. No, but the narrative is problematic.
Yes.
So everything that follows since then, and it's not only the Christian, Judeo, Islamic ones, but even in other religion also. When the deity goes naked, she is seen as dangerous. In Hinduism, the avatar of Shakti, when she comes into the naked Kali, she is in a really, really rage mode. So naked women body is seen as something mysterious, untrustworthy, and trouble. Therefore, it has to be shamed and controlled and contained. And it hasn't changed if you take pornography or celebrity naked photo scandal. First of all, I think when you talked about this scandal, there was a big news, a lot of actually writing about why you call it a scandal.
Exactly.
It's a crime. It's a cyber crime. It's not a scandal.
Yes.
She had they had their own photos clicked. If they want to circulate, they would have the right to circulate.
Exactly.
Leaking and circulation has two different dimension of the act. One is a criminal act, one is an agency exercised act. When you talk about, say, the actor versus Kim Kardashian, I think she's hilarious, but she's quite a good cultural reference point. Because her, shot to fame is allegedly her own leaking of her sex video, which gives this angle, the people who say leaking, if you've taken a photo, maybe you want to leak it. Because there are precedences of, incidents where actually men, women, different, they leak their own sex videos or photographs to the media and said, oops, my God, I'm going to sue you and get money. And there's a commercial part of it. So it just got a little muddled up because you don't know whose motive is that. But the female body gets, I'm sure, would we be that excited if I don't know, I love Daniel Craig, I would be buying it, but his naked photo was circulating. I think he wouldn't like it, but
yes, would it be a scandal?
No, but when Daniel Craig came in his first James Bond film, and that rising from the ocean, it was seen as erotic, as desirable as Ursula's rising from the sea as well.
It can be and it should be.
Yeah, I want to freeze it in time because it's so beautiful. But it would not generate the same kind of interest that Halle Berry recreates later on. Because the female body is seen as a normative of desirability, right? Therefore, something that can be gazed and desired for by anyone becomes, that domain of crime and sleaziness. So you want to put all of it in that one particular gendered body. Pornography, I am one of those feminists who think that pornography, if it's consensual and is for commercial purpose with the full knowledge of it and participation, is fine.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
So, but pornography is not that simple also, because they have lots of forced and exploitative labor and all of that. It's very close to trafficking and all of that. So if I take the problems out, conceptually pornography is a medium of expression.
Exactly.
But it runs on this whole patriarchal idea of heterosexual penetrative sex as a, that's why it's called the, if you look at the categories, obviously I watch pornography, it is obvious.
Me too.
You see the hardcore, the main ones are called hardcore, and then there are subcategories of that. But all of the subcategories are actually complementary to this hardcore, right? And the market is very diluted at this moment. So you have the race, you always see a pattern to it.
Yes.
Because the market demands that kind of pattern. But there is also feminist porn. The feminist porns are there.
Yes,
of course, people will laugh at it, feminist. Somebody's saying, oh, people are feminists because they don't get laid. But that's the kind of terrible joke. I know. And that's what they made porn now. But they think of all that. Because when I started doing my PhD, people told me, oh, you want to study sexuality? Oh, yes, you're not married, so you're sexually frustrated. So they would shame me first to shame my study. The same time somebody came and told me that you're so lucky, your PhD thesis is pornographic. See, it's linear. Sex, sexuality, desire, shamefulness, but extremely intriguing in our interest in that domain, muddles all our ideas. We all live in this contradiction of what I desire and what I can express. So this is a disconnect between desire and approved desire expression of desires, right? So that kind of things. And obviously, if you look at any form of visual expression, representation, female body is the first objectified thing. It's the easiest. I mean, you're selling, I don't know, this lamp, this sofa, put a naked woman. I think people will look at it. I mean, naked man, yes, maybe for a particular, pink pocket, pink cash economy. But people will. I mean, we have use of female body, and that is not seen as shameful. It's seen as added value to it. But if the woman takes kind of an agency for herself and decides that I'm going to use this body, then it becomes shameful.
Exactly.
And how could you?
Exactly, and very good example of Kim Kardashian. Because I mean, she's a fascinating character and fascinating cultural phenomenon, if I may, call it that. Is that there is, if you actually look at again the narrative surrounding Kim Kardashian, there's a lot of slut shaming involved, and there's a lot of class issues involved, because how declass, these people are after money and fame, and they would do anything for sex because sex sells. She is a woman who has decided that for whatever reason she would leak her sex. Her
mother is a brilliant businesswoman.
Exactly. So and then the class issue also plays into factor.
I think they should be studied in Harvard Business School.
I think so too. I mean, I think they are extremely fascinating.
I know.
And the other point I wanted to make is that whenever we talk about the male gaze, for example, and how problematic it is, and it is, but we also kind of detract from the fact that as if a woman can't present herself to a woman, as if there is something wrong with sexuality, there is something wrong or shameful about women choosing to be sexual or sexualized, as if there's only one aspect to female sexuality, which is always to be exploited and always to be abused, as if a woman can't choose to be sexualized, for herself or for her friends, or Kim Kardashian for business partners.
Yeah, if you want to be sexual for this lifestyle,
yes, go for
but
it.
No, of course they will not allow.
Yes.
I think it's again same with it has a very strong religious discourse to it, right? Because the female body, a sexualized female body is seen as the carrier of the reproductive role, and as a tool for this male sexual desire to be fulfilled. It never had a discourse where the woman, I mean, there are ethnic and indigenous ones and the subculture and alternative, but the mainstream ones are built on this, that the woman body, because God made Eve, to entertain Adam, right? He was like really sad, lonely thing walking around, and how boring is heaven? So, he needs to be entertained, and he's a woman, and like, okay, fine, I'm going to come on, but she's smarter, obviously. But, so the purpose of the creation of woman is for the, to serve the sexual and the emotional purpose of a man. Apparently, he needs a lot of support. But, so that carries on throughout. The body, interestingly, cannot be sexualized on its own unless somebody puts that discourse on you. It has to be expressed through other people's articulation, but not your own. The body will not have its own voice. A female body cannot have its own voice. Because first, you're not supposed to have a voice, and second is, if the voice is heard, what happens means that you're becoming too aware of your power. You don't want to that, because you want to contain that sexuality within reproductive roles, and you have to ensure that children are yours and all that angle stuff. So that continues no matter where you go. I mean, if you talk about something as morbid as rape, right? I mean, have you seen this company who has released that rape is just a snuggle with struggle?
I haven't.
I'm like, really, somebody go and kill them. Literally, I'm totally anti-violence, non-violence, but I think in this way they can actually legitimize to kill someone.
All men.
Kill whoever came with a business plan. Not all men. Some are really nice. The whole idea is that you can change, you can dare to even change the argument, articulation, discourse of a sexual violence of that nature, of that stature, as rape, into love, and that my right over your body in a forcible manner, but it is in the end love and care. So however you go. Rape, in fact, is the only crime within human penal history, is that in this crime, woman the victim has to prove that she's a victim. No other crime, demands that the victim has to justify that, yes, I was a good character and I'm now, I was eligible enough to be violated. Sluts don't get raped, this one doesn't get raped, It's only good women who can be raped. That kind of discourse is very, very strong within the legal system. It really reflects how we see female body. Women's articulation of, people make fun of Amazonian girls, the history. And oh my God, the girls who will capture the men and then make them sex slaves. It becomes again, a male fantasy and an excuse to ridicule female agency of the body. But you will not take it seriously. And they will, in the end, in any kind of film, show, the angry woman who is totally in control of her life and body. In the end, will be desperate for love and succumb to this, confirmation of marriage and household, and then hero wins and she kind of submits to this normativity of life. So totally, cuts the root of her own power of sexuality.
Yeah. Well,
sad,
very sad. Going back to the visual representation of the erotic, I wanted to just draw on Bangla cinema.
My favorite.
Okay. The Bangla cinema, I don't know if it's few years ago or actually, maybe now 10, 12 years ago, do you know that there was this movement about,
that was a farce.
Okay, yes, can you actually, because I remain fascinated about that. I mean, obviously, as we talked about, if we talk about, pornography or even, Bangla cinema and representation of, female, there are a lot of problematic issues about, labor and exploitation. But the way that debate kind of evolved was very interesting and very depressing to me at the same time, because all this talk about healthy entertainment, right? What exactly is healthy, right? Not showing the female body is
healthy and decent.
Healthy and decent. What is
family oriented?
Family oriented. What are these? What do they mean? But if you're talking about erotics, for example, there has to be an element of boundary crossing. There has to be an element of perversion, to be very honest. And in the context of this Bangla cinema debate, which was just mainstream commercial cinema, it was very fascinating to me that people talked in these terms, which was actually very conservative sounding to me, at least, when they were trying to clamp down on indecency and trying to institute decency. And to me, at least, everything came down to, again, regulating sexuality.
I don't know if the global audience will understand the context of Bangla cinema, but I think it's a valid topic, and it explains the concept of shame, erotica, and vulgarity very well. The whole debate is centered around culture and class, nothing else, and the control of production of an industry. And it was played on the female body of the actor, actress, and the plot. And it was seen as, because female body and sexuality of female body is seen as the marker of purity, right? How you control and sort of control the volume of it depends on how pure that culture is. The history of Bangla cinema from the Indian, side, from post 47, and then when Bangladesh became, an independent country, it had the legacy of a very progressive, middle class, produced ideas of culture.
Which is very, again,
very tight, very tight. It's about, beautiful love and happily ever after, the agony of a particular class, the unemployment of the hero and the crying heroine and all of that, political awareness. So it catered to a middle class audience who was getting educated for the first time in those generations, 50s, 60s, 70s, right? And only erotica came from one or two scenes of attempted rape. If there was a speck of erotica in it. Love, sex between husband and wife and no one else, because it's the root, was shown through the banging of flowers, right? So, or the bees on it. So we went to very metaphorical, very symbolic. My God, we are too high end there. This happened. It's still produced by middle class ethos for the middle class. And then actually the economy started changing, demography started changing. If you look at 80s, especially 90s, you have a lot of audience that is not middle class, right? Then it became known as the mass, right? As if middle class is not part of mass, because we're so good, we're so above everyone. Only, so, oh my God, it's only for rickshawalas, this is only for the labor class. They have this kind of taste. Middle class will not watch it. So what happened was, obviously, the new producers came, new directors came, they understood the market, they understood that, okay, erotica sells. So there were two ways of doing that erotica. One was using cut piece, which is cut small clips from pornographic films that was inserted in between main cinema. So people knew it would be it would have 5 minutes of pornography. So people would go for 5 minutes, literally jerk off and then come back. That was the main purpose. And they were very famous at the time. Ek ticket dui cinema, 1 ticket, 2 films, right?
That, yes.
And there's a wonderful book by Lotte Hawk on cut paste and the evolution of erotica in Bangla cinema and the economy behind it, especially in the late 90s and early 2000s. What happened was then, the whole control of the industry was out of the old generation of middle class makers. And the middle class was too snooty. Oh my God, I'm not going to go to the hall, and because I cannot watch these things with family. Entertainment is supposed to be for family. So parents, children, uncle, aunts, all can watch. So they can't watch people making love, nothing. It has to be total Puritan projection of society. They then withdrew from as an audience. And that time what happened was also the mainstream actors and actresses also say that, if I need to compete, I will take part in erotic scenes. And that's why you have this whole criticism of heroines like Moon, Moyuri and them. They were seen as pornography. B grade, C grade. You also give grades to the actors. Yes. So if you've shown a little bit of shoulder and a bit of your body, then you have C grade. Because you're watched by mass, not the class. And then in the whole idea of Puritanism came also back. I mean, politically also there was a search for the more conservative way of life, and they came and they tried to reclaim Bangla cinema and the industry, saying that it has to be snatched back from the clutch of this really, really horrible, minded, perverted commercial producers. Mind you, many of the mainstream actors now who are dominant used to take part in those films.
Exactly.
They had to give apology letters and promise that they're not going to go back to that, and then became mainstream. All the heroes, interestingly, got re-established in the decent, family-oriented revival of Bangla cinema. All these women got thrown out. Because they became the symbol of degraded moral values, and so now there is a kind of a para cinema. Oh my God, we're going to talk about how progressive we are. So it's back to a different generation of the same ethos of the 70s.
Exactly.
So it is a cyclic order. It's going on. It rejected any kind of attempt to even experiment with forms, because it was seen as non-normative. Erotica is non-normative. If it's too obvious, therefore you can use the word vulgar. Vulgar came then, not before that. So
yes, but again, it's interesting how the so-called progressive class or progressive society is as much enmeshed into these very puritanical, ideas or ideals of sex, sexuality, shame, shamelessness, and vulgarity.
They're very insecure.
They're very insecure. I mean, we have always known it's not only in Bangladesh, middle class anywhere tends to be more conservative, but there is always, tension between, progressive. Even in middle class is not a monolithic concept or a group. There are always this tension.
And more so now because of the neoliberal economy. It has a much wider spectrum of existence. And middle class will now, in South Asia, it's an interesting articulation of middle class. It still does not want to categorize itself through economic assets. It says middle class is a moral value-based classification of a society. So you could be very rich, but you say, but we are middle class, like in values. Like, I sleep on my Gucci bed, but because I feel so middle class value, it means that I still believe in very strict moral code of sexuality. And there's an aspirant middle class who wants to jump up. So there's a lot of tension in middle class. By the way, India has produced a lot of very good books on the emerging middle class
Yeah.
somehow.
Okay, so we should end